Hello and welcome to Keep Right On, a Birmingham City podcast brought to you from us here at Birmingham Live. I'm Brian Dick, and as you can see, I'm joined by our Birmingham City correspondent, Alex Dicken, who spent a pretty unsatisfactory evening in West London at Loftus Road last night. Alex, how was the experience of a last gasp 2-1 defeat away to QPR?
Yeah, it was pretty poor, wasn't it, all round? I don't think there's too much point us going over the game, and what happened. I think everyone who watched it could see that Blues were probably as poor as they have been away from home this season, I think. The away form in general has been very poor, and Chris Davies, was quite open about it last night after the game. For me, it was probably their worst away performance of the season. When you take into account that the Coventry for a large chunk of it is with 10 men.
Yeah, indeed. And against that backdrop, we put out a call for your questions and takes this morning, and you've responded in your absolute droves. And Alex, I should warn you now, it's quite warm out there, albeit in December, obviously referring to the social media environment. Excuse me. We'll just get straight into them. I've grouped them. Obviously, a lot of people want to talk about the away form. Chris Davies' comments after the game attracted some observations and some questions. There's been quite a lot of reflection on the recruitment, which we'll come to, the tactics, and then there's 5 or 6 really interesting takes for us to discuss as well. So, Alex, let's just go straight into it. And obviously, the big talking point is the away form. Nicholas asks, how much of this away form is down to mentality and attitude? Far too many passengers last night. Now, when we were chatting about this before we started recording, you didn't use the word passengers, but you were sort of on that spectrum, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, there are, a number of players in this Blues team. Chris Davies quite clearly got a best 11 now. He's established that. And I wouldn't be surprised if he reverted to it against Charlton because the home form has been good. But the disparity between home and away games is ridiculous. I can't quite put my finger on it. I guess the St Andrews atmosphere does play a part. It must play a part when you've got, 27,000, 28,000 Blues fans behind you. It's obviously a lot better than having, 1,600 or 1,700, whatever it was at Loftus Road, and a vociferous home crowd behind a team against you. But it's so passive. The perfect example, I can think of, and I'm not digging him out because we know, we shouldn't dig Pek Sung-ho out, but he's so passive. Yeah, he's so passive away from home. And you look at him against Watford last week, and in recent home games, he's been aggressive, setting the tempo in midfield, driving forward the ball. The goal he scored against Watford was outstanding, winning the block tackle, driving forward and unleashing a shot into the bottom corner. Watching him against Southampton at the weekend, he was flimsy in the tackle that led to Southampton's 3rd goal. And again at QPR, he's just so passive. It's always backwards. It's always sideways. He doesn't drive with the ball forward. And yes, we can look at it in stoppage time that he did play the pass, a little clip pass for Damari Gray to set up Patrick Roberts. But he is an example of Birmingham City struggles away from home. There are plenty of other players. There are worse players than Peck in this that we'll come on to. But, it's just... they just honestly, I can't put my finger quite on it because I just don't understand how you can be so good at home, and they have been recently, they've been fantastic, and go away from home and just be completely different. Some players, another one, Marvin Duksh, fantastic at home, absolutely pitiful in his last 4 away starts. Against QPR, he didn't lay a glove on them. He didn't do anything. And it was no surprise to see him taken off at half-time. And, Chris Davies brings on Kyogo, and he didn't do much better.
So, Jobs to Davies has sort of gone on the same theme. He said, with performances so drastically and consistently different on the road, is it just a case of mentality or tactics? So, Alex, mentality or tactics? You can pick what. It's probably not just one, is it? It does look, in terms of the energy levels, look different, don't they?
Yeah, maybe a combination of both. Like I mentioned about the crowd, Blues feed off the crowd at home, and that clearly plays its part, doesn't it? They've got the home fans behind them. Tactically, Blues, Chris Davies said last week that he doesn't want to change away from home. He wants them to be the same. What's the point in going away and doing something completely different to what they've practiced for 18 months? And I completely understand that. I think we've noticed tweaks that he's made in the last 2 away games. To the naked eye against Southampton, Tomoki Iwata's position in the first 30 minutes was a little bit more reserved. It didn't help matters because, Lito Cienza absolutely rinsed Blues down that side. But I think he'll rinse most Championship right backs this season. Against QPR, Iwata back into midfield. I think most of us would have wanted that. You couldn't have banked on Brighter Sai Samuel not playing particularly well again. He has been a real failing of the recruitment so far, I would say. I expected a lot more from him, but he's not the only one, as we'll come on to in a bit. I think Chris Davies tried to name a sensible 11 at QPR that would keep, things a little bit tighter. He spoke after the game about getting to half-time at 0-0. That's not something we've heard him say often while he's been Birmingham City manager, going away from home and trying to just see it through to half-time. But they just, at both ends of the field, it didn't add up. They were poor going forward, offered very, very little. And, as the first half wore on, it became quite obvious that QPR were in the ascendancy and we're going to eventually, from one of the many crosses they were putting into the box, we're going to score from one. Yeah,
indeed. There's no way... I don't think Chris Davies goes out and says, don't show as much energy. I think the other variable is, obviously, you're playing in against an opponent that comes to St Andrews and is probably, half a point down or half a percentage point in terms of confidence down, because they know it can be such a febrile bear pit of a place. You're automatically on the back foot, aren't you?
Yeah.
Similarly, with the run of results that they're on at the moment, opponents will welcome Birmingham City to their grounds because they know Birmingham City aren't the same Birmingham City away as they are at home as well. So, we are almost in the case of self-fulfilling prophecies. Chris Davies might want his team to be the same team away from home than they are at home, but I do think opponents are a bit more nuanced than that.
It works both ways, Brian. St Andrews is an absolute fortress and has been, during Chris Davies' time in charge. He lost one league game at home. Away from home this season, 7 defeats in 11. They're the away game, or they're the team that everyone wants to play at home, aren't they, at the moment? Or one of them, one of 3 or 4 of them. So, it puts massive pressure on their home form because they've got some very difficult home games coming up over Christmas and into the new year. And if they want to stay in contention for the playoffs with this away form, they can't really afford to slip up at home. They've got to remain perfect, and that's a dangerous place to be.
So, Nicholas and Dave, we haven't answered your question at all. We've tried to talk around some of the issues, which brings us on to Miles McKee. What seems more likely, the home form starts to slow down or the away performances improve? Miles says the Borough game seems like the only away game this season where we've actually played well. Preston was a good but an ugly win. It's dangerous territory, as you absolutely say, being utterly reliant on home form. I would be concerned about the home form dipping off more than I am optimistic about the away form picking up. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm probably there. I mean, what tends to happen in football is that the home form will probably dip off and the away form will pick up slightly, and it'll even itself out or whatever. But if you look at it over a season, and this is what I've been thinking, they've got 8 points from 11 away from home. They've got 20 from 9 at home. You're probably looking at they need in excess of 50 points to challenge for the playoffs at this rate. Because they're probably only going to end up with about 20 to 25 points away from home. So I think if they were to get 50 points at home and 20 away from home, I think 70 points is probably enough for the playoffs. It does tend to be for 5th and 6th, doesn't it? But that's a lot of points at home. There aren't going to be many better home teams in the Championship if that's what they have to do. So, I've no idea whether they're going to, tail off at home or whether I'm more worried about them tailing off at home or away. But I think, it can't go on. It's not sustainable. They're not going to be this good at home throughout a season. They're not going to take 20 points from the next 9 games probably at home. So they do need to pick up more away.
Yeah, indeed. Just on the home form, Coventry have got the best record.
Yeah.
They've won 7 of 9. Blues have won 6 of 9. Watford have actually got more points, but they've played 11 home matches and have only won 6 as well. Middlesbrough 6 of 9. In fact, they've got an identical record to Blues. Played 9, won 6, drawn 2, lost 1. But obviously Middlesbrough also have on the other side of that the second best away record in the division. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, that illustrates how big an issue or how important that away form is. Andy Bluenose asks, how long do you think Davies has to turn the away form around? I'm not one to say get him out, but Wagner and co want everything now. If we start slipping up at home, then he is in big trouble, surely.
Yeah. I mean, they'll measure it on both, won't they? You know, it's not just about away form; it's about where they are in the league. And Chris Davies kind of made this point at his press conference last week. Yes, Blues need to be better away from home, but 2 games ago when he was saying these words, they were 8th. I think 1 point outside the playoffs. And I don't think the picture has drastically changed, as it never does in the Championship. You can lose a couple of games and you'll still be there or thereabouts as long as you win your next couple of games. So Blues could win against Charlton and get a point against Sheffield United the following weekend and quite easily be in the playoff position. So it is just like that in the Championship. I don't think United will start panicking unless they, really tail off at home and fall off the pace. And at the moment, you can't say they're off the pace. They're just frustratingly passing up opportunities.
Yeah, we should probably have started this whole thing by saying after 20 games, Blues are 10th. With 28 points. It's been some years since they were 10th in the Championship on, at this point in the season. We should probably have sort of set that scenario out first. It's not panic stations, and certainly I don't think either of us are hearing anything like even, the jungle drums aren't even out, never mind beating, are they, in terms of Chris Davies's position, or we're certainly not hearing anything along those lines. But as you say, look at the situation in 10 games, Andy, then, which of us can predict which way they're going to go. Nick Spooner says, do you think we've changed too much with the side we had last year? Now, this is an interesting one. And this is in relation to the chalk and cheese home form. Big difference in the performances last year is that this year we're just staggering even with the different players. I haven't read that very well. But yeah, changed too much. This probably should have gone in the recruitment section rather than the away form section. Have they changed too much?
I've said this a few times at the start of the season because I felt like they had, like Ipswich a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to come into the league and really hit the ground running with a large chunk of the players they had from last season. I think they had to make some changes. I think they probably made a few more than I would have. I look at, did Christian Bielik have to go? Did Ben Davies, could Ben Davies not have come in? Have Blues drastically strengthened at centre-back? No, they haven't. I think we can quite obviously all see that. People like, Alfie May was a big player last year. I don't think he'd get a sniff in the Championship for Blues. That's my honest opinion. And there are a few others who they're perhaps right not to pursue. I think Kieran Dowell would have been a very interesting one. I know there was some interest in him over the summer, but obviously his situation at Rangers was very complex. And for a long time, it seemed like Russell Martin wanted to build with Kieran Dowell, and then all of a sudden he didn't. So I feel like Dowell was messed around a little bit there. I think Dowell would have been a good player for Blues in the Championship, or, I think he'd have at least played in the 10 position, which Willem Willemsen hasn't been fit to this season, and Kanya Fujimoto clearly isn't, a firm fixture in Chris Davies' plans. We've seen that. So I think they probably did change too much. It's a good point that's been made. And
but they had to do something about the wings, Alex. You and I sat here forever last season talking about them. Even when they were amassing 111 points, we were talking about the wing play in the Championship.
But the wingers aren't the problem, are they? I think Damari Gray's been a good signing.
No,
I think
the wingers have been good. Yeah,
Damari Gray's been excellent over the last
Pat Roberts,
month. Yeah. Pat Roberts for me has been their best outfield player since he joined. Yeah. So they're perfectly good signings. I can't complain about them. And the only frustration with Roberts is that it took till the end of the transfer window for him to join.
Yeah, okay, let's move on with that one. George Revel has said it's a bit of a different one. In all your time covering football matches for either of us, have you ever seen a side so good on home turf yet so bad on their travels? I mean, results-wise, you can get these quirks in what is, it's nearly half a season, isn't it? I would say performance-wise, this is the differences in the last... Has it become more apparent in the last month and a half, 2 months, would you say, there's this disparity? It feels like it has to me. When they're banging in 4 at home against Millwall and Portsmouth, and, they're struggling against Bristol City and again last night, and it does feel, the disparity does feel bigger now.
I think it's the fact they've been so good at home, isn't it? You know, they've scored 4 in 3 of their last 4 home games. You know, they've won 4 on the trot at home, I think. So yeah, I think that's the issue here. They've been bad away from home. There's no getting away from that. If we look at it, how many away games this season have they actually played well? I thought they deserved more than a defeat at Middlesbrough. I thought they were quite good at Middlesbrough. In fact, pretty good. They created some really good chances. I look at Bristol City was a really poor away game, quite similar to QPR. They didn't create anything. There was one moment in that game. But again, they're not.
Leicester wasn't great. Stoke wasn't great. Coventry wasn't great. Wrexham, they battled. They didn't outplay Wrexham, but they battled away. So I thought that was okay. West Brom wasn't great.
Fortunate to get a point at West Brom.
Yeah. No.
Southampton, the game was dead within 25 minutes. So yeah, they're far too easy to play against away from home. To concede. In 11 away games, concede the first goal in 10 of them, and 9 of those goals have come in the first half. That's, you're giving yourself an absolute mountain to climb. I just think that something needs to give away from home. It's a ridiculous record. I genuinely, I mean, in my much shorter career than yours, I haven't seen a team be so good at home and be so bad away from home. And their performances haven't really, in the main, wanted much more.
Yeah, it's the difference in performances rather than results. I would say, George. Right, Chris Davies spoke after the game. Darren Park, and I think most people are probably commenting on what was said in the Blues TV interview. A couple of things that sort of stuck out from that was that Chris felt that the team improved in the second half. So I'll read Darren's take. Surely Chris Davies doesn't believe what he said last night and is deflecting to try and take the pressure away from the team. We didn't deserve anything from the game and didn't improve as the game went on. Darren says it comes across as insulting to the fans. We know what we've just seen. And he adds, I understand he won't lambast the team publicly, but to double down the other way just comes across as wrong. So 2 aspects, Alex. I didn't think the team I thought the start of the second half was probably the worst part of the game for Blues.
Yeah, I think first 35 minutes of the second half, until maybe 80, 85, they didn't get going at all. Did they? I mean, the goalkeeper for QPR, his name's escaping me right now, but he looked really ropey. Yeah, he looked really ropey first half. And I thought, have some shots, put some crosses on him, put some corners on him, put him under a little bit of pressure. But they didn't actually do that until stoppage time. Tommy Doyle, I think, with a corner that he went for goal with, actually worked him for the first time properly. And then they created a little bit in stoppage time, and Dykes caused a few issues, as he does coming off the bench quite a lot. And they managed to get the goal. But I don't agree that they improved in the second half, because they quite clearly didn't. They weren't good in the first half, but they weren't any better in the second half. I can't think of anything first half they had, to be honest. I mean, apart from stoppage time, that's probably as easy a game as QPR's defence are going to have this season.
Yeah, I didn't think there was much in the first half. I thought there was in terms of between the two sides. I thought QPR were much the better side for half an hour of the second half. Kevin Turvey also makes that point. How he thinks we deserved something from the game, I'll never know. Was a boxer. Now, journalist called Chris Scudder was in the post-match press conference, so we're not referring to Davies's Blues TV interview. We're referring to the post-match press conference in which you were in, Alex. I don't know if you've seen the Blues TV interview, but he talks, as he always does, tries to take some positives. Suggested the early part of the second half was better. Expressed bitter disappointment at the manner of the goal, the late goal, and indeed disappointment at the defending for both goals. Was that the theme? Pretty much sum it up in the press conference, the media press conference as well.
Definitely disappointment at both goals they conceded, particularly with the first one, because he felt there wasn't much in the game at that point, and they gave QPR a leg up going into half time, which they've done too many times this season. He acknowledged, asked a question about Marvin Duction, the disparity between his home and away form, and he acknowledged that that's been an issue for him and for some of the players in the team. So he clearly recognises that. And he did also say that their away form hasn't been good enough, and that's the truth. So probably a little bit more what we want to hear, I think. Maybe in the post-match press conference, we want him to acknowledge these things that we're all seeing, and probably now's the time to do something about it. I was thinking on the way home, can he wheel out the same 11 that's quite clearly his first 11 against Charlton at the weekend because it's a home game and because those players have done well at home? But that defeats the point then, doesn't it? Those players can't, throw it in away from home and, not perform and then, get a reprieve when the team's at home just because they've been winning games there. Surely you've got to make the changes and there's got to be a consequence for not playing, to your level away from home, surely.
Yes. But then, the players that do come in sporadically aren't massively convincing either, are they? So, it is a tough one. I would say the difference between the Blues TV interview and the open press conference is obviously it's a club employee asking questions and they're not exactly, you're not going to get the Paxman treatment from a club employee. You hopefully gets slightly more direct and difficult questions from members of the independent press. Chris Scudder was a boxer mentions Chris Scudder's question when he basically said he asked Chris Davies why not go on the front foot from the off instead of preventing damage at the other end, and that Chris Davies didn't seem to know. You and I have sat on here and said we felt that Chris Davies has been too front foot in some away games. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, the big issue I've had in recent away games, not QPR, is that Blues have set up in exactly the same way as they have in home games. We've seen, especially think about West Brom,
the West Brom one's egregious, with Mikey Johnson, and Isaac Price tearing in behind the fullbacks,
Tomoki Iwata was playing as like a number 10, number 9 for the first 15 minutes, and West Brom got in 3 or 4 times, and you were just screaming for Tomoki Iwata to hold his position. He did that more against Southampton. He did it, or Brighter Side Samuel did it against QPR. He played a more orthodox right back against QPR. I think there are signs that Chris Davies is trying to adapt Blues game away from home. But again, the changes that he made for the QPR game probably were detrimental to them because Brighter Side Samuel wasn't particularly good in the first half and hasn't been particularly good in the whole time that he's been here. Jack Robinson at left back was an enforced change, and he doesn't give you anywhere near what Alex Cochrane gives you in terms of distribution and going forward. Although, to be fair, I actually thought he was quite solid defensively, dare I say it. I thought he put a few blocks in and largely justified his selection at left back for the 60 odd minutes he was on the field. I didn't think Aaron Cashin did bad in that position when he came on either, to be honest. But I think there are signs that Chris Davies is trying to adapt Blues game away from home, and he's trying to be a little bit more cautious. And I think that is what's been needed in the last couple of games.
So the poor guy, we've sat on here and said, he needs to be more defensive away from home. Then he's done that in the last couple, and he's got accused of sitting back and being, risk averse.
Yeah. No,
he can't win, can he?
No, he can't win on this one. He's trying different things, isn't he? I think, the bottom line is Blues need to improve away from home. He needs to find the correct formula, and he hasn't found that yet, has he? He needs to find a balance between defence and attack. You can't be as attacking as they were against, West Bromwich Albion in the first 15, 20 minutes, but you probably shouldn't be as reserved as they were maybe in the first half against QPR. So just needs to find a balance and a personnel that works away from home because, the team that is thriving at home isn't doing the job when Blues go away.
Yeah, okay. Right, moving on to recruitment. Charlie Brooke and Dominic R, 26, have asked about the loans. Is it possible to send back Kumas, cash in Beadle and get better replacements? Can we also get rid of Fujimoto? Robinson wanted by Sheffield United, Kyogo or Dykes. And he says recruitment has been awful this season. J-Mo says, is this proof that the window wasn't as good as it should have been? Gray has been good. Roberts, Dutch and Neumann have been okay. The rest have been awful or non-existent. We'll come on to, there's a couple more on there. So is it possible to send anyone back?
I mean, it's not just possible to send players back, but the parent clubs are probably going to want to take those players back as well. I look at Aaron Cashin, I'd be absolutely stunned if he was here when Blues play Coventry on January 4th. I think Brighton are definitely going to want to put him elsewhere in January. Lewis Kumas, Chris Davies spoke quite openly and honestly about him about 10 days ago, last week, when he was, saying that he's not been happy with his game time and, probably suggested Liverpool might not be either. So I think that's going to be a conversation to have at the end of this month, early January. I'd be surprised if Kumas and Cashin don't move elsewhere because they're not getting the game time they need here, and that would free up 2 loan spaces.
But Beadle is,
Beadle is, yeah.
We'll come on to him. A few people got takes on James Beadle, which we'll come on to. Fujimoto, I mean, that just hasn't happened. It's been a mistake, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not much point talking about it at this stage. Is there? Chris Davies clearly doesn't fancy him. He was there last night as probably the 24th man in line to get on the bench. He's not going to feature, is he? So it is best they move on from that one because Chris Davies has clearly seen something or more than we've seen of him. Because I still have no idea what Kanya Fujimoto can really do.
Yeah, they haven't even got the Virtue Trophy this season to give these guys run-outs, have they? Also mentioned Jack Robinson is wanted by Sheffield United. Apparently, didn't the Sheffield Star come out quite quickly and refute that?
Yeah, they did. And to be honest, I think that's the only place Jack Robinson can go. So
he's played for 2 teams already.
He's played for Sheffield United and Birmingham City this season. EFL rules stipulate you can only play for 2 clubs in one season. He could sign for another club, but he wouldn't be able to play till next season. So I think Jack Robinson probably stays to the end of the season unless, they cancel his contract in January, but that would probably create a little bit more work for themselves they don't really need.
Yeah. Okay. So we're moving on to the wider recruitment. Jamo says, "Is this proof that the window wasn't as good as it should have been?" I've read this. Gray's been good. Roberts, Dutch, and Newman, okay.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, "Have we been too soft on Craig Gardner and Chris Davies because of last season?" I mean, it was there were some transfer misses last season, and it was easy to brush over them with 111 points, wasn't it? So, maybe, and also quite easy to recruit championship players in a League One competition with the biggest budget. So I don't know that recruitment was massively insightful last season. I mean, they bought championship players in to lay waste to League One, and that's what happened. Lad says, "Is Craig Gardner under pressure? Will the club seek to change there? I wouldn't be happy with a lot of the recruitment if I were paying his wages." So, recruitment, Alex, do we need to talk about the 24-25 recruitment for the League One season?
I mean, the 17 signs in the summer and 3 over in January, so there's 20 players to pour over there, so that might take a while. I think this summer, the summer just gone, to sign 12 players, how many players are in the starting 11 from that? James Beadle, yes. Phil Neumann by default. Tommy Doyle, Damari Gray, Patrick Roberts. That's right. And also Marvin Dutch as well. So you've got 6 in the 11. Yeah. If you look at those players, Beadle, Allsop, Allsop didn't do a fat lot wrong, but I would say Beadle has been made marginally better saves and more saves. I feel like Beadle's probably got better saves in his locker, but there's not been much to choose between them. Neumann,
we'll come on to Beadle in a bit, but just to say now, I'm more Allsop than I am Beadle. But let's carry on anyway. Sorry.
Neumann, has he been an improvement on Ben Davies? I would say no. I'd probably be more confident playing for Ben Davies. And people might point out Ben Davies isn't playing regularly for Oxford, which he isn't. But he was perfectly suited to the way Birmingham City played. And I was on a par with Clara towards the end of last season for me.
He started for the first time in 2 months at Blackburn last night. So, mystery to me, that one.
Yeah, a 30-year-old Ben Davies on a 2-year contract for me would have been really, really good business. And no one will be able to prove to me at this moment in time that Blues were better served going to sign Jack Robinson and Aaron Cashin, because neither of those 2 transfers have worked. Tommy Doyle, I think, will prove to be a good signing. I think he has done very well in the time that he's been in the 11. And, when Blues have been at their best in the home games, he has been the beating heart of the team. So no complaints with Tommy Doyle. I think that was a really good signing. Patrick Roberts, again, proven, good signing. Damari Gray really coming to his own, really good signing. Marvin Dukes, very hit and miss. Great at home, very poor away. There's not really been any in between. He is, for someone of his size, you want him to put himself about a little bit more and actually fight the centre-backs away from home and hold the ball and give Blues that little bit of respite, and he just has not done that. That clearly isn't his game, and he doesn't really want to do that. You can tell he wants the ball to feet. He wants to play 1 and 2 touch passes, and he hasn't offered Blues anything away from home compared to what he's done at home.
But that would have been apparent. He's not like he's 21. He's got a decade-long career in German football here. The Blues would have known what they were signing, and it's probably the absence of someone to do the Djukovic role. Not saying that a Djukovic should be starting, but that play up against the defenders, tying up the centre-backs, giving them something to think about. They didn't sign, they signed Dux, and Dux is doing that role, but it's not necessarily his forte. That feels like a bit of an omission. But then, if they can only do so much PSR wise, and they wouldn't be the only team looking for a goal scoring, powerful, physical, aerially strong centre forward either. So you can't tick all boxes in a single window, can you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. My issue is the amount of players they signed and how few of them have really, really improved the 11 from last season. I'm not saying that the 11 Blues have got now wouldn't beat the 11 last season, because I think they definitely would. I think, particularly out wide, they've massively improved. Tommy Doyle is an improvement as well. Awata's given Blues a different dimension at right back. So I think some things have worked well. It's at centre back that I'm very disappointed. I thought Blues had a really, really, really strong trio, and Grant Hanley was a backup last year. They had a decent quartet, and to go from that to what they have now is disappointing. I don't think they need to make that many changes. They chased Phil Neumann for a long time, and physically, attributes wise, he looks like he should be very good in this league. But there are moments this season where I think he's been a little bit soft in terms of when the balls come into the box. QPR is the perfect point. I think he's weak in that challenge. Looking at the replay of that, you can see that Phil Neumann and Marvin Dukes are both appealing for a foul by Jimmy Dunn. Christoph Clara looks at it and just turns away, because he knows that is the Championship, that is the English game, that's how it works over here. They might not have had those physical battles in Bundesliga 2 or the Bundesliga, but I've been quite disappointed in Neumann, considering how hard the club worked to bring him over. Yeah,
indeed. I mean, if Blues win games, Craig Gardner probably sits back and think, that's half the team has arrived in the summer, and that's not a bad strike rate. If they lose games, then it all gets a bit uncomfortable. But no one's immune from criticism. To answer that question directly, they should look at their practices and the recruitment from this summer. And if they're not doing the job properly.
I don't think they can hide away from that, can they, Brian? Because if you look at the players who are on the bench that Chris Davies didn't turn to, Kumas last night has barely got a look in. He's, as I said earlier, him and Cashin surely are going to return to their parent clubs in January. Kyogo, they spent good money on, and he's had an absolutely disastrous 2025 and doesn't look like a player who's going to score many goals in the Championship at this rate. So, there have been some mistakes in the summer, and because there were some constraints with PSR, you have to make fewer mistakes, and there have just been probably one or two too many at this stage.
Just to say, Blues are 10th. They've got a good home record, and they're not out of the playoff race yet. Kieran has. Sorry, go on.
No, I mean they could win three of the next four at home. They could quite easily win 3 of the next 4 and be 6th or 5th. Come the start of next year. So the Championship is so crazy that it is important for us all not to overreact to one very, very poor performance.
Yeah. Okay. Kieran's asked, what sort of wiggle room is there in the January window?
The two we've mentioned, the 2 loan players, if they go back, that does create some room, doesn't it, for 2 loan players to come in. Personally, I would love to see Blues sign a centre-back, a left-footed centre-back that can just restore the natural balance at the back. One who is clearly, better and more equipped than than Jack Robinson and Aaron Cash and can take over from Phil Neumann and play next to Christoph Clara. I think that's a position where they desperately need someone to just become a mainstay. I'm quite comfortable with Tomoki Iwata at right back, although he's going to be absolutely flogged over Christmas at this rate with Bright Eye Samuel going away and Ethan Laird out injured. I don't think Chris Davies is going to want to play Alphonse Samsted much in the Championship. I'll say that. In midfield, maybe they could do with, if Iwata is playing right back, maybe they could do with a more physical option. If you've got Peck and Tommy Doyle in midfield, at home it works when Blues have got 65, 70% of the ball and having a great time, but away from home, maybe not strong enough in there. They became so stretched, particularly in the Southampton game, that I thought maybe they could do with an enforcer type. I like what Blues have out wide. I think they could probably do with a speedier alternative to Patrick Roberts for some away games. I do think Roberts could be rotated away from home a little bit, and they desperately need a number 10, don't they? I think Chris Davies acknowledged it at the end of the summer transfer window that he spent some time looking at number 10s. If Kanya Fujimoto is not going to work, Willemsen's had his fitness issues, they need a number 10 to come in and hopefully free up Jay Stansfield to go back up front, because I do think they've still missed that away from home. They've not got that pressing power they had last season and the season before when Marvin Dux does that role over Jay Stansfield.
Yeah, and Chris Davies is insistent that he prefers Jay as a up front, as a number 9 rather than behind as a 10. Yeah. Brings us on to Kyogo. A lot of people asking about Kyogo. Blues KRO 1875. Is there a possible scenario the club might cut their losses on Kyogo and try to move him on in January or next summer? Everyone's been backing him, but that miss at Southampton, fans have started now to lose their trust in him. That transfer just hasn't paid off as hoped. Elliot G, at what point do we cut our losses on Kyogo? Kyo just doesn't feel like he's going to score, does it? And, we've spoken about this privately on a couple of times when we had Ryan McDonald on in the summer when they signed him. The phrase that just leapt out was, and I can't unhear it now, was, he felt that Celtic had the best of Kyogo. And it just does feel that way, doesn't it? There's no other way to paint it other than the fact it's not been what anyone hoped for.
I mean, yeah, he's had an absolutely disastrous 2025 from a personal point of view, to go to Rennes in France and not score a league goal, and then to come to Blues and not score a league goal. And to be honest, he's had the chances and he's missed the chances. And, Chris Davies has kind of stopped saying, his stock answer at the beginning was, Kyogo always gets chances. I'm convinced that he'll score goals. He's done it his entire career. He didn't say that after Southampton. He acknowledged that it was a very bad miss at a crucial time in the game for Blues. There comes a time where, yes, Kyogo gets chances, but if he keeps missing them, what's the point in playing him? He got 45 minutes against QPR and didn't look like he was going to score a goal. Admittedly, Blues didn't really look like they were going to create much for him either. But it just hasn't worked. And, I don't think they'll be able to move him on in January. And this is part of my issue when they signed Kyogo and Marvin Dux, because they gave both two 31-year-old players 3-year contracts.
3-year deals, yeah.
And yeah, the people who gave out those contracts might say, it's easier than you think to get rid of players and move them on. And Blues have done that in the past. But what about if they can't? Kyogo's not exactly going to be in demand at the moment with what I presume is a fairly decent salary that he's taking at Blues, on what was, I presume quite a decent transfer fee, given that he moved to Rennes for £10 million just in January. There aren't going to be many takers for him at the moment. So Blues are going to make probably a quite considerable loss if they do try and move him on, which is why I think they'll have to try and play him into form over the second half of the season.
I was going to say that, actually, just to play devil's advocate. He's not had 5 games starting or not for a long time. He's had 5 games starting where you can say, run yourself into the ground and leave it all out there, and you'll be starting in the next match. Now, I know that's not even Mo Salah gets that luxury, does he? But it is difficult to play yourself into form, but then he hasn't looked like playing himself into form either. And last night, again, we didn't see enough, albeit he would say, well, the team didn't give me anything. So, yeah, it is a very difficult quandary. Tactics, move on to tactics quickly. BG says, do you think the forwards like to play in this type of system where they get so little service or involvement? How long until Stano gets very frustrated? Paul Drinkwater says, question around the formation. Surely there is a way to be more compact on the road or even for the first 45. Focus on solid defending and wait for the game to open up as home teams are forced to look for more openings, perhaps a 4-4-2 or a 5-3-2-1. Moving to a 4-2-3-1 later as the game progresses. Do you think the forwards like playing this type of system where they get so little service? I mean, the system isn't designed not to give them any service. You know, even last night there was 2 or 3 balls that Dimmy put into the box that there was no one in the middle for.
There was one first half where Damari Gray's got down the left and he's whipped it in the only place possible. He's put it right across the face of goal, and Marvin Dux had just stopped in the middle and hadn't made the run. If he'd have carried on his run, he might have had a tap-in. So
the service isn't great, but it's not designed not to produce service. And I'm sure the forwards aren't having fun, no. But it's at that point where you want Dux to make an impact in other ways, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. He can't just put his hands on his hips and say, well, they're not giving me service. He's got to actually, do his bit for the team and play his way into a game as well and offer something. Damari Gray hasn't had the best service in the last couple of games, but he's still been Blues' best outfield player and has still tried to make things happen. Patrick Roberts as well, he was fairly poor against Southampton, but he bounced back against QPR, and I thought he actually played okay later on and maybe second half and looked one of the more creative players. Although I do have a couple of issues about him away from home and how he fits in and whether Blues are solid enough on that side with him when it's him and Awata or him and Bright Samuel. I look at that Preston game and I know Chris Davies, when he watched it back, probably wouldn't have been massively pleased with it from his philosophy point of view. But for that night, Blues looked quite solid. They had 2 centre-backs who wanted to head everything. It definitely was Phil Neumann's best game for Blues alongside Clara. They had natural fits at fullback in Asai Samuel, and then later Awata stepped in quite well. I think even Samsted came on at the end, and Alex Cochrane. They had almost a 3-man midfield with Doyle, Peck, and Awata to start, and then Leonard came on. And they had pace on the flanks in Gray, and I think it was Kumas later replaced by Anderson, and Stansfield up front. So I think sometimes away from home in the Championship, I don't want to be an advocate of Blues becoming this, counter-attacking beast, but you need to have the option, don't you? I think you need to have those weapons. You need to have Damari Gray, Jay Stansfield, and potentially a Kumas or an Anderson in positions where they can counter-attack. And Blues just too often are just too slow in those things and want to play their patterns. And away games, sometimes it calls for something different or something a little bit more.
Yeah, is it possible that they could become more of a low block team and play on the counter? They've not got absolute flyers, but they've probably got enough pace to stay away when they get away. If you're thinking about a counter attack, it's possible, but then that goes back to philosophy.
They could do it, couldn't they? Surely, I know Chris Davies won't want to do it and won't want to change, but they have to be flexible tactically within games, don't they, to recognise what's going on. Game management has been an issue in the last 2 games. There was, a 3 or 4 minute period after Damari Gray scored against Southampton where it just went crazy. It became a really frenetic game, and Southampton took advantage and scored their 3rd goal. If Blues had just calmed things down for 5 minutes, then they had 30-odd minutes to go and get a chase and equalise. They didn't have to do it there and now against QPR. They've got their equaliser. They've played poorly. Take your point and move on. Instead, they retreated properly into their 18-yard box. Didn't realise that Kieran Morgan was going to shoot rather than cross the ball. And there was only really Tommy Doyle making any kind of attempt when he realised what was about to happen. And the shot's gone through bodies and beaten Beadle. He probably shouldn't have beaten Beadle, but that's another matter. So
Paul, 4-4-2, I think you leave yourself. I mean, they do play that out of possession sometimes, to be fair. In possession, 4-4-2, you've got to be confident in your 2 centre-backs that they are enough, which I think Davies is largely. The 4 in the midfield leaves you with the 2 central midfielders, and that is a lot when many teams try and overload and get a 3 in there somehow. So, 5-3-2-1, you're not sneaking 11 outfield players onto the into the side there, I'm afraid. Paul, good idea though. Right, let's move on to takes. Ian Campbell, it says it's easy to look for scapegoats, but I feel nervous every time Neumann receives the ball at his feet. Really think he's a worry and struggles to pass the ball forwards. And he says Beadle is a flasher and a flapper, definitely not that. Beadle is a flapper and often pushes the ball back into the box for strikers to pounce on. And he thinks Allsop should return as soon as possible. Neumann, we kind of talked around Neumann. It's the playing out is one issue. The bigger issue for me is he's not defending in a way that I want a championship centre-back to defend, i.e. physically, and playing it like it's a contact sport. Anything to add to that?
No, he needs to be stronger. There have been multiple occasions this season, not just Jimmy Dunn beating him for that header, but where Neumann has needed to be stronger physically, aerially. As I just alluded to, the only game we've really seen him dominate and be that player is against Preston, where he had the dream game, scoring the winner and, helping Blues keep their only clean sheet away from home. With regards to him in possession, I don't know whether you've mentioned it on the pod, but I spoke to someone over the summer when he joined Blues, and they made the point to me to watch what he's like in possession, because some coaches, a number of coaches in Bundesliga 2 had basically allowed Neumann to have the ball rather than the other Hanover defenders, because they didn't rate him in possession and thought he would be the one to give it away. So when I heard that, I thought, okay, it's one to watch, and he has been pretty poor in possession. When he came out from the back last night against QPR, there was a really good scenario on the right hand side that opened up. There was a ball over the top which looked fairly simple. Says me, I'd have probably ballooned it into the stand, but it looked fairly simple. And he just kind of stumbled into the ball and just passed it to the player in front, and they managed to counter-attack. So he just hasn't looked like a comfortable player in possession. And, as we mentioned, more worrying is what he's been doing defensively when balls are coming to Blues box.
Yeah. I think absolutely. I mean, you've already said this. If Blues can get a left-sided centre-half and allow Clara to go back onto the right in the January transfer window, that is absolutely a route to go down. Beadle and Allsop, I was... sound like trying to be smart now after the event. Was never massively sold on Beadle in the summer for the reasons that the ball did often come off him back into the danger area. I didn't think Allsop had done enough for that call to be made just yet. And there was a period where I thought, there was a few games where I thought, okay, you can see a higher ceiling with James Beadle than Ryan Allsop. But I think in the last couple of games, I mean, you made the point on Saturday after Southampton that some of the saves he made at Southampton were absolutely excellent, and the score would have been bigger without him. But then the third goal is the ball being pushed back out into the middle of the penalty area. Last night, yes, it was a horror. The second goal was horrible. Just seeing everyone backing off, and then seeing it go through Beadle. Everyone. There's about 3 players that are culpable in that, but Beadle has to stop that. Is there a case now to reverse back to Allsop? There is a case. I don't think I'm quite yet. I'm really averse to changing goalkeepers, Alex.
Yeah,
I think,
especially because I thought, like you, Brian, I thought Blues had found the solution to that position with Beadle. I generally think he's done quite well, apart from the last 2 games. There'll be other goals that Blues have conceded since Beadle's come in where people might say he could have done better, and that's fair enough. But I genuinely think he has made some saves that Allsop probably wouldn't have. I'm thinking those against Southampton. There's been others in other games, just some excellent saves, and he is a very good shot stopper. I have issues with the parrying out. I think he's parried it into danger a good number of times, and I think generally younger goalkeepers and modern day goalkeepers are taught to parry or punch rather than catch, aren't they? And that's been a bugbear of mine. But as long as he's parrying and punching into areas that aren't dangerous, I've no issue with it. But the problem is, in the last couple of games, he has been parried into the danger area. So I don't think I'd make a change. I don't think Chris Davies will make a change or will make a change. But he probably has to do a little bit better. I think that the thing is here, Blues have put their eggs in the basket of a young goalkeeper, haven't they? And, they could have in the summer. I thought, if you're going to go down the route of changing goalkeeper after Ryan Allsop's just won the Golden Glove in League One, I think you make it absolutely abundantly clear who is number one by signing a goalkeeper who's already developed, who's up here, who's clearly got a better championship pedigree than Ryan Allsop has, and there's going to be no argument over who's number one. Chris Davies prefers to have two number ones, he puts it. So he's got two players of fairly similar ability competing for that position. What they've done with Beadle, with him being so young, is allowed him to make mistakes. He's going to make his mistakes this season because he's 21 years old. I think they probably could have gone for more experienced and proven, because he is going to make errors. That's why he's not playing in Brighton's first team now. By the time he's not making these errors, Brighton will have him in their goal, won't they?
Or Carl Rushworth, who.
Well, yeah, he probably looks the better one, doesn't he, Carl Rushworth? But he is a few years older. So yeah, Beadle's going to make mistakes this season. It's probably only fair to look at the goals that he prevents as well, and I think he prevented a few against Southampton.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Let's move on. Gaz Devon said, Chris Davies said post-match it was a difficult defeat to take. Is he not seeing what we are? We deserved what we got. 0 points. January is just so important to improve this squad. He said Neumann looked shaky, Dutch ineffective wingers weren't allowed to play. Plan B, we're predictable and easy to beat. Is there anything you want to latch onto in that one from Gaz? Other than, I would say absolutely. I didn't think Blues did deserve a point from last night.
No, nothing, and they are very easy to beat away from home. I think they're easy to play against. They're one of the teams that have conceded the most goals in the league away from home. As I mentioned earlier, conceding the first goal has been an absolute Achilles heel away from home, and that's not sustainable. How many times have Blues come from 2 goals down to win a game away from home? Never under Chris Davies. So, Southampton was, yes, they played fantastic for 45 to 60 minutes. And probably had the better chances in the second half. And, they did have a higher XG, although I know you hate that one, Brian. But the game was done. At 2-0, the game's done. Southampton had Blues exactly where they wanted them with the players they have on the counter-attack. So they can't go on like this away from home. They need to be better. They need to find a way to win games.
Gaz, we'll come on to Plan B because it kind of relates into another take. Davis Dugout says there's definitely a reluctance from Chris Davies to admit tactical wrongdoings. I'd rather him come out and say what was done wrong and then try and fix it in the next game rather than this naivety. Yesterday, we were so far off it. Both fullbacks exposed, lost our duels, very abject. I would say with that one, there's only so many times a manager can come out and say, I got it wrong. And I think it's probably about once, maybe twice maximum a season, because you really are flirting with it. Well, you keep saying you're getting it wrong. You're inviting trouble, aren't you?
Yeah.
Any observations on that one, Alex?
Yeah, I will say I know he got a lot of stick for his team selection against QPR, but I could see what he was trying to do.
As well. I
could see what he was trying to do. I think he's probably been let down a little bit by some of the players that have come in over the summer that just haven't done it when he's rotated them back into the team recently. And I think as we go towards the January window, I know there's a few games to come before January, but I think there's probably going to be more changes than he would have wanted to make. I think he's going to have to wheel and deal a little bit, and they're going to have to make some considerable changes because they do want to get promoted this season, don't they? They've not shied away from that fact. Every single player who joined the club in the summer said, there's one goal, targeting promotion. It's quite clear that was a message when they were negotiating to join Blues. So if they want to get promoted this season, if they want to be in that conversation, they probably need to be very, very good in the January transfer window and make maybe 4 or 5 changes.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we're running very long now. We're nearly pushing an hour. Concerned of Dorridge, otherwise known as Viva Sol, says, my question is, our tactics seem to be moving our defence up to the halfway line, trapping 21 players in the opposition half, and then we try and play through an incredibly congested area and if you're not Pep's Barcelona, this is incredibly difficult to do. We end up losing the ball or getting eased out due to our lack of physicality, and a quick ball forward from the opposition means our centre-halves are exposed. This was especially prevalent at Southampton. Have we looked into playing a bit more compact and deeper away from home and springing quick counters ourselves using our excellent wingers and the pace of Kyogo Stansfield? If not, why not? and shouldn't we be tactically flexible? I think those
It's a good take.
It really is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
what it does beg, though, is a bit of a philosophical backtrack, doesn't it? But I honestly say I'd have no objection if Blues, I mean, they're not going to go to Middlesbrough or Coventry again, but if Blues go to one of the better teams and are more conservative and leave some space for themselves to run into, no issues with that whatsoever.
No, me neither. As I mentioned earlier, I think the more athletic players in the squad, I would be quite happy to see them play against in the next away game against Sheffield United. Can't they have a front three where all players are mobile and all players can spring up counter attack? They've got the options there. They could play Damari Gray left, Jay Stansfield as a striker, and Lewis Kumas or Keshi Anderson as a right winger. They could quite easily do that. It does feel like Blues have to score the perfect goal all the time.
Yeah.
And that's never a good thing away from home, particularly when you can see the first goal, because you are playing right into their hands then, because they can sit back, soak up your pressure. And, as the take mentioned, when Blues are condensing the play, there's a lot of space in behind them and they are getting punished. I thought Burrell, and particularly Burrell, but Burrell and Kone for QPR absolutely killed them in the spaces in the channels on Tuesday night. And there was one instance in that game where the play is largely in QPR's half, and there's a QPR player, I think it might have been Steve Cook, with his back to Blues goal, facing his own goal, and he's just hooked it over his head. And knowing that they've got those two players who are going to chase it in behind, and Christoph Clara had to chase down Burrell and eventually gave away a throw-in, which again was a long throw that QPR were able to put Blues under pressure from. So sometimes it is just about playing those percentages. It's all well and good playing this fantastic football, but it hasn't been getting Blues results away from home this season, so they do need to adapt.
The next away game is at Sheffield United, and I can tell you, so I don't know if it's necessarily a case to sit back at Sheffield United. They're not a massively ball dominant team, but what they are is that, they are absolute beasts in both penalty areas, that sitting back, I don't know, might be an idea there. I'd be wary of giving Gassama too much time to pick the defence apart. Let's rattle on. Sorry, Lamard. Hello, Alex. Long time no here. Second half was like Bolton away, and we've done nothing to fix it. Everything is played into feet because of the lack of pace and power. So if you press us high and tight and condense the pitch, we are not very good. Alex didn't use that word. It's like trying to play keep ball in a phone box, no out ball. I largely blame recruitment.
There's a lot of the stuff there that we touched on, the recruitment of the strikers in particular. Kyogo has been a big miss so far. Duxha's been a hit at home, a miss away from home. There's not many players who've come in, maybe 4 or 5 who've really impressed. Actually, there's probably 3 who've really impressed. Doyle, Gray, and Roberts for me. 3 of 12 have really impressed. That kind of tells the story, doesn't it? There.
It does. And finally, Blues and Bears, there is a lack of experience of the coaching staff. They're all learning their trade, and this shows. You can see, I think, Chris Davies's cogs almost whirring around his brain when he's trying to make changes and when he's watching Championship football. I know he'd say I've been in the game 20 years, and I think he probably has said that. But these are new experiences, for a man in his first season as a number one, and I've seen a progression so far this season. I've seen him sort through combinations, try and nail down some variables, and I have seen a progression. They weren't playing as well at home 3 months ago as they are now. So that said, they probably weren't playing as badly away. But that we've been round in that circle a few times. It is new for them. And I think that is a statement, and I think that's a fair take.
Yeah, they've got a manager who's still developing, haven't they? 18 months into his first managerial job. He's obviously, been an assistant for 15 years before that or whatever. But I suppose he is the boss isn't he? He's in charge. He makes all the decisions. Yes, when he's deliberating over which player to bring off the bench, Ben Petty will be there discussing it with him. But ultimately, I do think Chris Davies is a man whose mind is going to be very difficult to change when he has an idea. I think he'll listen to people around him, but ultimately, it's his neck that's on the line when he's managing Birmingham City. And I don't think he's shying away from those decisions. I don't think he's going to want too much influence from those around him when it comes to those decisions either.
Yeah. Okay, Alex, we've strayed into an hour. So if you're still going, I really do appreciate your interest, Alex. Thank you for your time. All that remains is to point out that Birmingham City are 10th, 3 points off the playoffs at the time of recording. They may slip down after tonight's game, but yeah, thank you for your time, and it's a big keep right on from both of us.